Welcome to a brand new episode of the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined as always by producer to the stars and co-host Chris Brito. We're going to discuss the Pacers reportedly deciding to blow it up, more Portland drama, and the Knicks are still struggling. Before we get to all that, Chris, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Steve. Happy to join you on another episode of the All Hoops podcast. Our team isn't playing that well, but I think with some adjustments, I think the team could make a turnaround. I mean, we saw some life when they played the Spurs. We handed it down to them, but we also lost big against the Pacers the night after. There are a lot of things to reevaluate with this team. I think you start with the starting lineup. But before we get into the Knicks, which we have a lot to say about the Knicks, let's talk about the Pacers. The Pacers came off a blowout victory over our Knicks, right? But right a day before that, this week, there are reports that the Pacers are trying to blow it up. So guys like Sabonis, guys like Levert, Turner, they're all on the block. Everyone but Brogdon. So my question to you is, this is like the first year with those guys are healthy, relatively healthy. Do you think it's the right decision to blow it all up right now?
I do. I like all those guys. I think Sabonis is a really good player. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the game. Turner's been really good the last couple of years, but this team isn't going anywhere, right? Like the East is better. They have been competing for 8 seeds the last couple of years, and I always believe that's the worst place to possibly be in the NBA, just battling for the playoffs, the play-in 8-9 range, and that's where they are. They're 11-16 on the year, and I just don't really see them improving. Like I don't see this as a top 4 seed competing for a conference finals in the next couple of years. They don't play much defense. The individuals to me just seem better than the team together because, you mentioned those guys. Those are good players. Brogdon's a really good player. Chris Duarte is going to be a, rookie, all first rookie team. And yet these guys can't play. Like they don't play well together. It doesn't work. Sabonis, Turner, having 2 bigs, it just doesn't work. And now you got Myles Turner just saying, I'm glad I'm on the block. I don't fit here. I'm tired of being a glorified role player. So, Chris, I want to know from you, in terms of, let's start with Sabonis. Where do you see the best fit is for him, and how do you see a trade coming together?
So we'll get into this a little bit more with Portland, but I actually think Sabonis would be great in Portland. I mean, him next to, a guy like Dame would do wonders for the next phase of Dame's career. I don't think Dame is leaving Portland anytime soon, but we'll get into that. I think his skill set combined with Dame's will electrify that team. Because right now they're sort of in a rut, right? Both teams are in a similar place where they're just like not good enough to be great and not good enough to suck. If that makes any sense.
Exactly. No, that makes sense. For sure.
And right now the best move for Sabonis would be somewhere like Portland, where you can pair him with another superstar, and I think they would wreak havoc in the West. I mean, I think if Sabonis goes to the West, he's probably the 3rd or 4th best big man in the conference.
I like that a lot. And you mentioned, Sabonis going back west. He played in Gonzaga. I'm sure he'd love to go to Portland. And a McCollum and a first for Sabonis does make a lot of sense for the Portland Trailblazers. I'm just thinking, if you're Indiana, and you are saying, okay, Turner's on the block, Sabonis on the block, Levert's on the block, like they're all on the block. Do you really want to take back a guard, not an aging guard, he's still young, but like an expensive guard in CJ McCollum? Because I think if they're taking this apart, they're looking to blow it up. They're not looking to change parts around. They're looking to say, let's tear this down to the studs like Houston did and get into this loaded 2022 and then 2023 draft class next year. So I think Sabonis out west to Portland makes sense. You just got to find a team with a lot of young players and draft picks. And that's why I feel like a team like Golden State makes more sense. Wiseman, Moody, Kuminga, and a lot of good picks upcoming in the future.
Yeah, and the move to the Warriors makes a whole lot of sense too. But the other thing that might work in Portland's favor is that Sabonis' dad played for Portland too.
Yeah.
So there's that connection there. It makes a whole lot of sense in terms of both rosters. It, as you said, it's just a matter of making the monies work. But the Warriors, could you imagine Draymond Green, Sabonis, Klay Thompson, and then Steph Curry?
The championship. It's over. They win a championship. And, I put up something like this the other day where I said Sabonis to the Warriors for those young players and picks I suggested. And the Warrior fans were like, we can't give up all that. Those guys are the future. Kuminga has been great. And I'm like, you trade the young depth every day of the week to basically guarantee yourself a trip to the finals. And that's what they would do, because right now they look like a toss-up between them and Phoenix. You add another piece, it makes sense.
And are you going to tell me, Sabonis isn't an upgrade over Looney or an upgrade over Wiseman, who, like, I think when the Warriors were thinking about Wiseman, I thought they assumed it would be something like a center who could be a playmaking center as well, right? And that's what Sabonis essentially is. And so it would make a lot of sense. And I think the Warriors have the easiest assets to let go of. And maybe they'll even let go of Wiggins, I don't know, to make the money work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's definitely something they should pursue for sure. I think also Sabonis is a guy who doesn't play a lot of defense, and to be on a Warrior team that's basically number one in every defensive category, they can kind of make up for that a little bit. Turner Sabonis front court has not been great defensively, but a Draymond Green Sabonis front court could be pretty decent defensively. And I think that's definitely the one place I would bet on right now. If he gets traded, I think it's there. And, you talked about this before the show. December 15th is the day to keep in mind here. That's when contracts who got signed over the offseason are allowed to be traded. So that's really the day where these trade talks could really open up. And I want to hear now, Myles Turner, he's been a defensive player of the year candidate the last couple of years. They tried giving him away in the Gordon Hayward sign-in trade that failed with Boston, right? So where do you see him going? Obviously, his value is a lot higher than it was then, but I think he's still pretty gettable.
It's funny. I think he'd probably do wonders with the Celtics. Speaking of the Celtics, but everyone can use a big man that can shoot. It just really depends on a situation where he can really expand beyond that. And in terms of looking at the whole league, I mean, I'd love for the Knicks to get him. I mean, I think, the ship is sailing with this whole Mitchell Robinson, Noel Gibson center combo thing that we have working on. I'd love to trade one of our young guys plus Mitch for Turner.
Who's that young guy?
I think quickly.
That will be tough to swallow for the Knicks fans. He's been a fan favorite for sure. I do think that trade does make the Knicks better. So
it would be a tough pill to swallow, but this is what we're doing, right? Like we're still in the talent acquisition phase because we do not have enough talent to compete with the best teams in the NBA. As great as Quickly is, you can find another microwave scorer in the draft next year. It's just how it is,
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's something the Knicks should pursue. Turner is a guy who, that's kind of the upside of Mitchell Robinson, right? Like, shot blocker who can do a lot of different things defensively. I don't really see Mitch's game becoming that diverse offensively. And he's also a guy you got to pay this summer. He's an unrestricted free agent. So I'm curious to see what kind of value does he have on the open market, in a trade, right? Like, does Indiana say, okay, we'll take him as the centerpiece of a Turner trade? Or are they like, hey, he's unrestricted. I don't really want to deal with paying him when he's a worse version of Turner. So it'll be really fascinating to see how that plays out. But definitely the Knicks could use an upgrade like that. Last guy, Karis LeVert. I've already heard him linked to Cleveland. I think that's the perfect fit. A wing who can, doesn't do a lot of defense, but, can score a little offensively. He'll reunite with his old buddy Jared Allen from their Brooklyn Net days. And I wonder if they would be interested in sending back a guy like Colin Sexton, who's only 23. He's out for the year. They've already made it pretty clear they don't really want to pay him. He's a restricted free agent this summer. I wonder if that makes sense, a Sexton for LeVert swap.
I mean, I like it. I just don't know if the Pacers will be willing to take on Sexton in a contract year.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes
Depends
down
on what
to.
they think of him.
It you know, if you're a team that's planning on tanking, then take on Colin Sexton because it might be a sort of a 2-for-1 situation. You get worse, but get a higher draft pick. And if that doesn't work out, you have Colin Sexton, who could probably come off your bench if you don't see him as a guy that you see long term as in the starting unit.
And you could still tank with Colin Sexton. Like, look at Cleveland. They've
Yeah,
been in the top 3 of every draft since he's got here, basically.
I mean that's also true. It just really depends on the money that you plan on investing in him.
Yeah.
Karis LeVert, when he was on the Nets, is something I'm going to admit today. I loved seeing him play on the Nets. I thought he was fantastic there. I think a place where he could actually really excel is in a place like Orlando. I granted it's a place where it has a lot of holes, but it's a place that he can probably call his own. And I think with if you're rebuilding, someone talented as Karis LeVert would be great there. I mean, but
Yeah.
anyone can use a microwave scorer like him too. I mean, I think he was great when he was replacing guys like Kyrie Irving when they were injured. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I definitely think that's interesting. And if I was Indiana and I said, all right, we're trading LeVert, this is the time to do it because he's finally healthy. And that's been in short supply in his NBA career. And that
Yeah.
contract looked like a bargain last year when he was swapped for Oladipo. Now it's kind of looking fair. And now if he gets hurt again, you're wondering if that looks like a bad contract, making 18, 19 million a year. But let's move on. The Portland Trailblazers, we've talked about them a lot in the last few weeks, right? But things have gotten much worse. CJ McCollum has been diagnosed with a collapsed right lung, and he'll be sidelined indefinitely. So Lillard's going to have to do this on his own. And you think to yourself, okay, this has got to be the time where he's like, all right, the GM's been fired. There's culture problems. My wingman is gone. This is the time to ask for the trade, right? But no, the reports are that he wants a contract extension this summer at a tune of 2 years, $107 million. So the way I see this, Chris, is like this. He wants his money. He wants to stay in Portland. If they're willing to give him this giant deal where he'll make $55 million at the age of 36, he'll stay in Portland. And if not, they're going to move on. And then he can say, I didn't ask for the trade. They didn't want to pay me. So he comes off as not the bad guy here. And it looks a lot like what happened with Kemba Walker in Charlotte, where if he made the All-NBA team, he was due $200 million. And he made the All-NBA team, and Charlotte said, we're good. And no one blamed Kemba Walker for leaving, right? No one did that at all. And I think that's kind of where we're going with Portland here, which it really depends on who's going to take over for this GM position. They made it clear that it's going to be a long search and that the interim guy is just an interim guy. So it really comes down to what does the next GM decide? Does he want to blow it up or does he want to build around Damian Lillard? And I don't think that's an answer we're going to get until the summer.
No, and frankly, what Portland should do is obviously start from scratch.
Yes.
And whoever leaked the Dame contract thing is obviously very brilliant because
I think it was Dame.
It might have been Dame himself. I mean, who else would do that?
His team,
his agent, right? It's a brilliant move. I think Dame is someone who obviously cares about his image and his stature in Portland, deservedly so. But the right call is to start new. The right call is to trade Portland, to trade someone like Dame and get as many assets as you can right now. Because every moment that you spend, it'll be another moment where, Dame risks an injury, Dame risks not playing up to par. So really, they need to find a GM quickly. And then B, they need to trade Dame. I hate to say it, but if that's what the plan is, because clearly Portland's not good enough to hang in the West. In a week in the West, it's just time. It's dang time to
I totally agree with you. If you just look at this team, before CJ got hurt, he was having his worst year. Nurkic just looks like a shell of himself defensively. And this is a team that just never could get a stop on any defensive possession. Now you're missing CJ, you're missing Nurkic. There's really very little here. Norman Powell's having a solid year, but you also gave him $90 million. He should be having at least a solid year. And Lillard hasn't been great. Lillard has not been Lillard. And I think it's early enough in the season where you could say, hey, you're still going to give us everything you have, every asset the Knicks have or Philly or whoever these teams are. But if he's still shooting, under 30% from three, 50 games in, 60 games in, it's going to be a lot harder to tell the Knicks or any of the other teams, give us everything.
And quite frankly, the trade that needs to happen right now is Dame for Maxey and Simmons.
I think if I'm Portland, I need more because I can't go to my fan base and say, hey, we're starting over, but we brought in Ben Simmons and Maxey. Like, what is that going to get?
I agree with that. I just think that, that right now should be the baseline. I mean, and some picks, obviously.
And picks.
And picks.
Yeah.
I would even see if they throw in,
Thibault,
Thibault, right. Just right now, I mean, that is the most obvious trade to make. I mean, you could even make the argument, keep Simmons, just give me Maxey. He's just playing really well right now in that starting lineup. And, I mean,
it's interesting because, I see Maxey and Quickly as very similar players. And you were very ready to throw Quickly into a Myles Turner deal. But Maxey now is a centerpiece to a Lillard deal. I'm curious what you think about the difference between those two guys. Do you really see Maxey as more than just an off the bench scorer?
I mean, I just hold Maxey to a higher, I don't want to say higher standard, but I have him in a higher regard because he's playing well for a team that is right now in the midst of playoff contention, right? Can we say, sure, Quickly has been a difference in many of the games that we have won, but he kind of is what he is, right? He's a glorified bench scorer. I mean, right? At least that's what I see right now.
I don't think what you're saying is wrong. It's just interesting to hear it. You know what I'm saying?
It is what it is, right? You're not Quickly has been given the green light to shoot as many threes as possible. He makes many of them. And he makes a lot of these game-changing plays, which obviously I appreciate. And obviously he's often a difference in the Knicks coming back or Knicks not coming after being down thanks to the starting lineup. I don't know. I mean, and then the difference with Maxey being that he's playing well. He's played great when someone like Embiid has been out. And right now, the Sixers are playing pretty well, and you kind of haven't heard them missing out on Simmons, and I think in part of it is because of how well he is playing.
Yeah, no, I think he's, obviously Embiid is an MVP candidate, but Maxey's been an MVP for the Sixers. It really has been. Embiid's been, and I butchered that, right? But Embiid's been in and out of the lineup. There's no Simmons. Tobias had COVID, so he's been great, and I do agree that he is better than Quickly. I just think if I'm Portland, I got to get more for my franchise guy. And maybe that's the best they could do. I don't know. I mean, when you think around the league, there's not a ton of better options. You take the Knicks option, but I think it's not as good of a player option, but it's a better pick option. So it's really what do you prefer? If you're New Orleans, when you traded Anthony Davis, you got a whole lot of good young players and picks. When you're Houston, you didn't really get any good young players. You only got picks. So it really just depends on what this new Portland GM sees fit for his roster. Does he see this as a 4 to 5 year rebuild where I'm looking for 2025 picks, or am I looking at that as a 2 to 3 year rebuild where I'm trying to build around a Maxey, an RJ Barrett, one of those kind of guys? So we'll have to wait and see there. But let's move on. The Knicks, we talked about a couple of interesting trade ideas for them there. But in terms of no trades, what's been the biggest problem here for this team that really is just mediocre? They're just mediocre, 12-13 on the year.
I even think mediocre is too generous, but the biggest problem right now is that they can't really play defense, which really was their bread and butter. And listen, it's not fair to blame it all on one person, but if you're looking at what changed between this year and last year, it's, adding Kemba and adding Fournier to the starting lineup. So the first thing that I would recommend if someone asked me would be remove Fournier from the starting lineup and either promote quickly or promote Rose. My preference would probably be Rose. And just get some continuity with the starting lineup. Like, let this be the starting lineup for the rest of the season.
Are you concerned about wearing Rose down too quickly? Like, you saw him playing big minutes in the starting lineup in the playoffs last year, and he was done by game 4,
Listen, so this is where I think I am concerned about that, but like right now, our team is not very good, and you need to salvage what you have right now and figure it out later on. You can either trade for someone later on. I mean, we have that Kemba trade piece that we have Kemba who we could potentially trade later on, so we have that in the works, and so you need to move Fournier to the bench because he's not someone who plays defense. He's not someone who like really changes the momentum of anything. If anything, he kills it. And not to say that Rose or Quickly is a tremendous upgrade, but they can do more than just shoot the ball and do pick and rolls with Randall. They can get other people involved. They shoot threes at a higher clip. And frankly, Fournier has been sort of like a momentum killer. So maybe you hide him on the bench. Maybe he's not the 8th guy or 9th guy. But it's not working. It's clearly not working. I mean, chalk it up to Tibbs not figuring out how to get the most out of Fournier, but you cannot rely on someone who has a good game every 4 or 5 games. You need to have some consistency. I mean, look at, what to expect from Randall. You know what to expect from even Burks, right? Right?
Burks, yes. Randall, I don't know. That's my biggest issue with the team.
Well,
Go on.
Well, the thing with Randall, though, is that I think there's a lot of stock in what he does in terms of like either he is out, he comes across like comes out of the gate scoring or comes out of the gate like fixing up for his teammates. That's what he should be doing, the latter, and looking for a shot less. I mean, that's what made him great last year. But the problem starts with the defensive liabilities on this team because this team has no identity right now. And I think once you can fall on your identity, you can learn how to figure it out on offense. Which the offense, listen, it's not great, but defense is what got us into the playoffs last year. And you at least have the offensive weapons to turn it around later on.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last year, right? Where I said building a team around defense makes some sense for the regular season. It's not going to make a ton of sense in the postseason because you just need guys who can make shots down the stretch of games. And we're not even back at that option anymore. That's not even a talking point. We're trying to get back to the playoffs. And, you talked about the defense, and last year they were number 1 in points per game allowed. 104 a game. They were great, stingy. They played at a slow pace, right? This year they're 17th. And that's really what it comes down to. They just don't get stops. And, you mentioned the defense, and Fournier has been just killing them. I'm curious to say, would Leon Rose in this front office allow Thibodeau to bench him, making $20 million a year on a long-term deal? I mean, the Kemba Walker thing, he was a flyer. Everyone kind of thought of him as a bonus here, right? Like, he's not making a lot of money. It's a contract you can trade. Fournier is not an easy-to-move contract. And I think benching him kind of signifies to the league, we made a mistake. And I don't know if Leon Rose is willing to do that. But, again, we haven't heard him talk. We don't really know what he's thinking. But that would be my biggest thought there. My biggest concern is Randall right now because obviously the defensive concern, you mentioned that. He's just not looking like the same guy. He looks like the year one Randall, which is still a good player, but not that all NBA, all-star caliber player he was last year. He's just not passing the ball. He's turning it over too much. The shot selection, I question, and he's not shooting as well from three. So,
So
go ahead.
here's the one note on Julius. I think what made him great was the fact that he was opening it up for his teammates. So he needs to get back to that. And then part of why I think that he's been forcing shots is because the Knicks have been down a lot. And so if you fix the original problem of playing good defense, you can work your way to get good shots on the offense rather than this sort of like gun-ho mentality sometimes that Randall has and like the bad shots, because I do think he feels an extra responsibility to get the team back into it, and as he should. But the part that made him great was that he was organizing the offense for his teammates. And so I think if you fix the original sin, it might be better. But, you know,
Makes sense.
and in terms of the front office, it does give me confidence that the team said it was okay for Tibbs to bench Kemba. And I'm not saying you're going to do that for Fournier because it's a different deal. But I'm confident that this team is, I'm confident that the executives running this team will make the right decisions moving forward. And listen, if they decide to blow it up later on this year, that's fine. I mean, there's at least a competent front office. So,
Last thing before final thoughts, we talked about the Pacers, right? They blew out the Knicks this week, and they're 11-16. They're saying we're not good enough to compete in the East. They look better than the Knicks. What does that say about this team?
I think we need to look. I think it's still too early, Steve, to be quite frank. But I think when we get to the mid-season mark, we should really look into the mirror. We should really look in the mirror, because so far from what we've seen, it looks like last year has been a fluke, which hurts to say. And then this year, it might be worth looking into seeing how we can improve this team long term. Like, if the decision is to rebuild through the draft, it's not the worst thing in the world. We tried. This current formula isn't working, but it's important to not be stagnant. And I'm confident the front office knows the difference.
Yeah, and I do believe this is a good front office. I do.
Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but look, the front office said, okay, we need to upgrade over Elfrid Payton, brought in Kemba Walker, didn't work out, fine. We promoted Alex Burks to the starting lineup. We needed a better offensive option over Reggie Bullock. Fournier is a decent option. It didn't work out. The ball's in your court next.
Have you seen what Reggie Bullock's been doing in Dallas?
No.
It's horrendous. Like, his shot, he just lost his shot. It's gone. And they're like, what do we do? And that was the only acquisition they brought in. So, I mean, I think they picked Burks to me over Reggie Bullock. That looks great. They brought Derrick Rose back at a contract I didn't love. That looks great. The Nerlens has been hurt, but him at $9 million a year is not a killer. The only one that you can question right now is Fournier. And again, as you said, it is early. He could get this going again. I'm excited to see that. Who knows? Maybe he's just gassed from the Olympics. He was a really important part of that team for team for French. And
that was 4 months ago.
I'm making excuses here. I'm making excuses for sure. I'm just hoping that he's just not bad. And that's where we're at right now. Chris, let's move on. Let's get to our final thoughts right after this. All right, Chris, final thoughts time here. The Houston Rockets, they were 2-16, Chris. They've won 7 in a row.
I'm really happy for Steve Silas, man. Like, what bad luck to think that you're going to get the Houston Rockets job with James Harden as your best player, have him traded during the season, and then play with these like rookies, misfits, G Leaguers, and now you're seeing this team turn around in a really cool way with Christian Wood, who, as we both know, we both wanted him on the Knicks as a career journeyman, just really playing well, like an all-star level well. And I'm really happy for the Houston Rockets, but especially for Steven Silas.
I saw something where if you could bet $100 that the Rockets were on the 7-game winning streak, you would have 38 grand. That's how unlikely they were to win these games. And it's crazy because, they've done this all without Jalen Green, for one, who's had a very inefficient year. And if I'm a Rocket fan, if I was being glass half empty about this, that would be my biggest concern. But it's good for Steven Silas. We were starting to hear his name on the hot seat. Is he the right guy to build, help a rebuild? A lot of young players. He was originally brought in here to work with John Wall and James Harden. Those guys aren't here. And so good for them. 7 in a row. I hope they keep it going. Christian Wood, I would love to see him get traded to a contender, get the Rockets a few more picks in the process and get him in the national spotlight. Eric Gordon, too. He's been very good during the streak. And they do have a bright future there. It's just, they're in a rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, the Rockets are in such a peculiar position, right? Because everyone thought they were going to suck, and they may still very well suck. But, Christian Wood, before this 6-game winning streak, I thought would have been a great candidate to be traded to Portland. And now it doesn't even. Good. Now there's a higher chance of Dame going to Houston the other way around.
How about that?
I don't know. I think it's really encouraging to see the Rockets playing well. And yeah, I mean, they had a great win over the Nets. I mean, without Kevin Durant, but it was still a great win.
Yeah, very well said there. That is going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up the show?
So we have the December 15th deadline or date, whatever you want to call it. Is there anybody that you think would be a prime candidate to be traded, like, Dennis Schroeder, Kelly Olynyk, or any of those guys that were signed in the offseason that you think could be on the move? Or Daniel Tice also.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the Rockets streak kind of started when, for one, Jalen Green got hurt, and two, they moved Tice to the bench, and they said, we're going to play with one big at a time, and that's just the way the modern game works. So I don't know how much value he has, but Kelly Olynyk's a guy who can help a lot of teams as a backup, a big. He was in Houston last year in a pretty big role, and he put up pretty good points and rebounds. So I think he's a guy. I think Dennis Schroeder is staying put in Boston. I think they need him there, and I don't think they could trade his money for something that's going to help them better. So Olynyk is definitely a guy I could see on a contender.
And in terms of our Knicks, who would be a good suitor for Kemba? I'm trying to think around the league. I mean, I feel like everyone could use a veteran point guard, but where do you see that fit working out?
I'm wondering if the Lakers for a Kemba for Kemba for Kendrick Nunn swap makes sense, where Kendrick Nunn is now out for the season for the Lakers, and the Knicks would take back his contract. He's under contract next year as well, and in exchange, the Lakers would get Kemba, and they would probably give the Knicks some kind of sweetener. Maybe a future first round pick in a very long from now, right? Just trying to gain more assets there. That's definitely a guy who could help the Lakers, and, the Knicks would get something for their troubles for helping the Lakers and taking on a contract that can't help them this year.
You know what? The Kendrick Nunn swap makes a lot of sense because the Knicks were also interested in signing Nunn in the offseason.
Yeah.
And the Lakers were interested in getting Kemba Walker. So I like that a lot, actually.
I know most of their picks are going to New Orleans right now. So it would have to be, a long time from now, but I definitely think that's something that could make some sense. And again, teams could use Kemba Walker. He's a guy who can help off the bench. He's a scorer. Every team can use one of those. He's not going to have a ton of value, right? Because the Knicks have come out and said he's not good enough to play for us. So you can't be like, hey, give us a lottery pick. But could you get, the 30th pick in the draft in 5 years from now? I think you probably could.
I'm okay with that. I mean, anything for Kemba at this point would probably be something we didn't even expect, right? I mean, Kemba Walker was supposed to be a vital player this year. He's not. I mean, getting him
So
from something will be fantastic.
if you told me Kemba Walker's not playing for the Knicks, I would say, okay, his knee blew up and he's just not the same player. And that's not what happened. he was playing. He played almost every game basically, and now that's it. And it's very unfortunate to see because he is a New Yorker, and you always love to hear about those homecomings, right? But this one
You
just
know what?
didn't work out.
It's so funny you say that because a lot of the stars that have born in New York, obviously, that have come back and played, hasn't really worked out. I mean,
Marbury.
Kemba, Marbury, Meta World Peace. I'm probably forgetting somebody else, but um, wasn't Trace? No, Tracy McGrady wasn't born. No, he's from Florida. Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, but
amazing.
there was definitely a few. I mean, we're hoping, Obi Toppin works out. He's from here, right? He's from Brooklyn. And
So,
Carmelo worked out, even though he's kind of a Baltimore guy, but he is a New Yorker. I don't know
so
where.
no, he's from Red Hook. He's ours. We
Okay.
claim him. Wait, one final thing before we leave the show. Obi, what's your stance on Obi? I think so. Obviously, I want him to play more minutes. I mean, if the season ends up being a dumpster fire, like I want to know by the end of the season, like what player he can morph into. Obviously, I love the dunks. Obviously, I love what we've seen from him so far, like developing a little bit more of an offensive game. Um, what's your stance on like fans like clamoring for more minutes from him? Like, I obviously think he's an asset on the floor, but I wonder how much of it is like people just get caught up with the highlights and maybe like because if you see him on the floor, he doesn't play defense very well.
Yeah, I mean, when you're 12 and 13 and you were a 4 seed last year, you're 12 and 13 this year, fans are disappointed. They want change. They want to see something different. And if you look at plus minus, you look at all right, like in their roles, who's been playing the best on the Knicks, you can make the case Obi Toppin's number one of the whole team. And that's why, you said yourself, you want to see him play more minutes. I want to see him play more minutes. I'm not sure he's a starter. He might just be a good energy big off the bench with highlights and doing all these different things, but he's definitely earned more minutes. And when you're a team that has gotten very little out of your centers and Randall, at times looks gassed, I don't really see the harm in bumping him up an extra 6 minutes a game. And I think that right now could give them a little energy boost. We keep talking about Thibodeau's done a good job of whoever's really playing well plays the end of these games. Let him play a little more. Let's see how it goes. And maybe he gets exposed and we say, okay, he's only good for 15 minutes a game because if not, the defense is going to get exposed or this is going to get exposed. But we won't know until we find out.
Yeah, I mean, I've loved his attitude so far, and obviously all the dunks I make is very happy. You could argue that the game against the Pacers, his dunk was probably the only Knicks highlight of that game.
Yeah, that it was like for sure.
Did you see what I forget if it was the Daily News. I think it was the Daily News, but they had a photo of him making that dunk, and literally they had one shining moment.
That is pretty good. That is good right there.
Yeah.
That is going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. Chris, thank you so much. Thank you all our watchers on YouTube and listeners on Spotify and Apple. We'll be back next week to talk more NBA hoops.
Bye, everyone.